every English translation of the Buddha's most famous teaching has the same mistake. The word is suffering. It is not just imprecise, it points in the wrong direction entirely. The original was never about pain. It was an engineering term for a wheel that does not sit right on its axle. The man who chose that word, suffering, was a British magistrate stationed in Ceylon in the 1880s. He did not know he was about to make the Buddha sound like the most depressing philosopher in history. That single translation made millions of people hear this teaching for the first time and walk away convinced it had nothing to offer them. The real meaning, the one he missed, is not depressing at all. It is the most practical diagnosis you will hear today, and it starts with a woman carrying a dead child through the streets of a city in northern India, knocking on every door, asking for medicine that does not exist. Her name was Kisa Gotami. She lived in Savatthi, in the kingdom of Kosala, and she had married into a family that did not want her. She was thin. The name Kisa means lean, and the only thing that had changed her standing in that household was the birth of her son. When the boy died, she did not grieve the way the texts describe grief. She refused to believe it. She carried his body through the streets, door to door, asking every household for medicine, not funeral rites. Medicine, as if the child had a fever that simply needed the right cure. No one could help her. But no one could stop her either. She walked until someone, the texts say a wise man near the edge of town, told her that the one person who might have medicine was the Buddha, who was staying in a monastery nearby. She went to him. She held out the child, and the Buddha did not say no. He said, "Bring me a mustard seed, just one, but it must come from a household where no one has ever died. No parent, child, no spouse, no servant." She went back into the city. She knocked on the first door. They had mustard seed. But the father had died 2 winters ago. The next house, a daughter, lost to fever. The next, a grandfather. The next, a child younger than her own. Every door opened. Every family had the seed. And every family had the death. By evening, she was not carrying the child anymore. She had laid him down somewhere between the 11th house and the 12th. The texts do not say exactly where. They say she came back to the Buddha and told him, "I understand now. I thought this was mine. I thought this was something that had gone wrong with my life specifically. It had not. It was the condition itself." This is the moment to hear the word she would have heard the Buddha use, not suffering. The Pali word is dukkha, pronounced dukkha, and it was not a religious word. It came from a much older, much more mechanical place. Du means bad. Ka means the hole at the center of a wheel, the axle hole. A wheel with a good axle hole sits flush. It rolls clean. The Pali word for that is sukha, good hole, and it is also the Pali word for happiness. A wheel with a bad axle hole wobbles, not broken, not destroyed, just off-center. That is dukkha, not agony, not punishment. A wobble. Kisa Gotami's grief was real. The death of her child was real, but the dukkha, the wobble, was not the death itself. It was her insistence that this should not have happened to her, that this was a malfunction in her particular life. The Buddha did not take her pain away. He showed her that the axle hole was the same size in every house on the street. The wobble was not personal. It was structural. She stopped asking for medicine and asked for teaching. But the teaching she received had been traveling through languages for 2,500 years, and somewhere between Pali and English, something got lost. In 1881, a man named Thomas William Rhys Davids founded the Pali Text Society in London. He was not a monk. He was not a scholar of religion. He was a British district judge stationed in Galle, on the southern coast of Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka. One day, a case came before his court that involved a dispute over monastic law. A document was entered as evidence. It was written in Pali. No one in the courtroom could translate it. Not the lawyers, not the clerks, not the judge. Rhys Davids decided to learn the language himself. That decision, made to resolve a single legal case, led him to translate the entire Pali canon into English. And when he reached the word dukkha, he chose suffering. It was not an unreasonable choice. Dukkha does include pain. It does include grief. But suffering is a word that points only at agony. And dukkha is a word that points at the entire spectrum from mild irritation to existential despair. It is the wobble in your Tuesday when nothing is wrong, but nothing feels right. It is the gap between what you expected and what arrived. It is the moment after you get the thing you wanted and realize the wanting has not stopped. His wife, Caroline Rhys Davids, later tried translating dukkha as ill. It did not catch on. The scholar Analayo, working a century later, argued that perhaps the word should not be translated at all. Just say dukkha. Let the Pali do what English cannot. But by then, the damage was done. 3 generations of English speakers had already learned the first noble truth as life is suffering, and most of them had done exactly what you would expect. They had heard it, decided the Buddha was a pessimist, and moved on. In 1971, 2 psychologists named Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell gave this pattern a different name, the hedonic treadmill. They studied lottery winners and found that within months, the winners were no happier than they had been before the money. The high faded, the baseline returned, the wanting resumed. The Buddha described the same mechanism 2,500 years earlier. He just called it Tanha, thirst, not desire. Thirst, the desperate, parched reaching for the next thing before the last thing has even landed. Tanha is not all wanting. It is the wanting that cannot stop. So if dukkha is not suffering, if it is a wobble, a misalignment, then what exactly is wobbling? If this is changing how you hear that word, hit subscribe, because every video on this channel does the same thing. It takes something you thought you understood about the Buddha and shows you what the original language actually says. And what comes next is the part that matters most, because the Buddha did not just name the wobble, he mapped it. He found 3 different ways the wheel goes off-center, and one of them is happening to you right now in a part of your life where you would swear nothing is wrong. You stub your toe on the edge of the bed. That is the first arrow. It hurts. The Buddha had no argument with that. Pain is real. Loss is real. The body breaks. The people you love leave. The thing you built falls apart. He called this dukkha dukkha, plain dukkha. The wobble that comes from the wheel hitting a rock. You cannot avoid rocks. He never said you could. But then something else happens. You spend the next 20 minutes angry, not at the pain. The pain is already fading. You are angry at the bed for being there, at yourself for not moving it last week when you thought about it, at the morning for starting this way, at the fact that things like this always seem to happen to you. That is the second arrow. And the second arrow is the one you fire yourself. The Buddha told this to a group of monks in a sutta called the Savatthi, the Arrow Sutta. He said, when an ordinary person is touched by a painful feeling, they sorrow, they grieve, they lament, they beat their breast, they become confused. They feel 2 feelings, a bodily one and a mental one. It is as if a man were pierced by an arrow, and then immediately after, pierced by a second arrow. He would feel the pain of 2 arrows. The trained person feels the first arrow. They do not fire the second. This is where the 3 types become practical. Dukkha dukkha is the rock. You cannot remove every rock from the road. Viparinama dukkha is subtler. It is the wobble that comes from change itself. You get the promotion. You feel the high. And within weeks, the high has flattened into a new normal, and you are scanning the horizon for the next thing. Not because you are greedy, because the wheel is built to wobble when things shift. The pleasure was never going to stay at that height. It was never designed to. And then there is Sankhara Dukkha, the deepest wobble. This is the low hum underneath everything else. The effort it takes to hold yourself together as a fixed, stable person in a world that is not fixed or stable. The energy you spend every day maintaining the idea that you are the same person you were yesterday. You are not. But the maintenance never stops. And that maintenance, that quiet, invisible gripping, is the axle that never quite sits flush. The Buddha did not invent a thought experiment when he described this pattern. He was looking directly at a man who had all three types running at once and could not see any of them. His name was Pasenadi. He was the king of Kosala, one of the most powerful kingdoms in northern India. He owned 3 palaces, one for each season. He had musicians, dancers, an entourage of advisors and cooks who had spent their entire careers mastering a single dish, the Donapaka Sutta. The Sutta of the big meal records what happened the day he visited the Buddha. He arrived panting. He could barely sit down. He had just eaten a full bucket of rice and curry. Not a bowl, a bucket. The text is specific. The Buddha looked at him and did not lecture. He offered a single verse. When a person is constantly mindful and knows when enough food has been taken, all their afflictions become more slender. They age gently, protecting their life. But the teaching was not about food. Pasenadi had 3 palaces and could not sleep. He had every pleasure available to a human being in the 5th century BCE, and he was panting on the floor of a monastery. The wobble was not in what he lacked. It was in how he gripped. Every feast was viparinama dukkha, pleasure that could not stay at its peak. Every new palace was sankhara dukkha, another piece of the identity he had to maintain. And the panting, the heaviness, the inability to sit comfortably in his own body, that was dukkha, plain and physical, a consequence of gripping so hard that even his stomach could not hold it. In 2005, a neuroscientist named Sara Lazar at Harvard put long-term meditators into an fMRI machine. She was not looking for enlightenment. She was looking for structural changes in the brain. What she found was that people who had practiced recognizing this pattern, not fighting the wobble, just seeing it, had measurably thicker cortex in 2 specific regions. One governed attention. The other governed interoception, the ability to feel what is happening inside your own body. The brain had physically restructured itself around the practice of noticing the wobble instead of adding the second arrow. The dopamine system tells the same story from a different angle. Your brain does not register pleasure. It registers the difference between what it predicted and what it received. Get a reward you did not expect. Dopamine spikes. Get the same reward again. Smaller spike. Again, almost nothing. The system is not designed to make you happy. It is designed to make you chase. That is the hedonic treadmill. That is viparinama dukkha in the language of neuroscience. The Buddha did not have a lab. He had a king on the floor who could not stop eating. He saw the same mechanism. Dukkha is not a complaint. It is not a verdict. It is not the Buddha saying life is bad. It is a mechanic looking at your wheel and saying, here, this is where it rubs. And a mechanic who can point to the friction is a mechanic who knows how to fix it. So here is what you take with you. First, dukkha was never the Buddha's word for suffering. It was his word for misalignment, a diagnostic term borrowed from a mechanic's workshop and applied to the human mind. The wheel is not broken. The axle is not destroyed. The whole is just slightly off-center. And that changes everything because you do not fix misalignment by enduring it. You fix it by seeing where it rubs. Second, the next time you feel that familiar friction, the irritation that has no clear source, the anxiety that arrives on a gray Tuesday for no reason, the vague sense that something is off, even though nothing is wrong, do not ask, why am I suffering? Ask a smaller, more precise question. What am I gripping that was never still? Third, And this is the one that matters most. You are not a person who suffers too much. You are not cursed. You are not broken in a way that other people are not. Kisa Gotami knocked on every door in the city before she understood this. Every house had the seed. Every house had the death. The wobble is not yours. It is the wheel. And the moment you see that, the moment you stop believing your particular axle is uniquely damaged, something releases. Not the pain, the loneliness of the pain. You stop carrying it as if you are the only one. What is one thing in your life right now that you know you are gripping too hard? Drop it in the comments, not to fix it, just to name it. Sometimes naming the wobble is the first turn of the wrench. If this changed how you hear that word, subscribe. The next video takes apart another word the translators got wrong, and it is a word you use every single day. The Buddha never said life is suffering. He said your wheel has a bad axle hole, and then he handed you the wrench.